I first met Gus, I'd say over 30 years ago, as a co-ed in college, in my college dorm room. You see, I turned on my little 9-inch TV, black and white, and there on that screen appeared a man who was talking about things that I had never heard talked about on TV before. Positively black, for those of you who are old enough to be in my generation, was really life-changing. It confirmed to us that there was change and that our issues are important issues. And at that time, I said that Gus, even though I didn't know the nomenclature then, Gus was a friend in my head. Little did I know that 20, 30 years later, I would meet Gus in a courtroom, in Judge Dickinson Debevoire's courtroom, where Judge Debevoire called the head of the housing authority a liar. And he said, you know that new person you just hired? I didn't approve it. You were supposed to go out and hire a firm to do the Stella Wright Homes Hope 6 grant, to implement it. And I thought to myself, uh-oh, I don't have a job anymore. But what the judge did was he said, you've got to go and meet with Gus, and HUD has to go and approve your credentials. So I took the truck to Gus's office, went up to his office and sat there, and I waited for him to come and get me. And there was a little routine with the way Gus handled things. It was always very genteel, and it was always very well-reasoned. He ushered me into his office. There was the little civility of going back and forth, and then Gus would sit down, and he would cross his left leg over his right leg, and he would sit back, and he would let you talk yourself to death. He didn't ask any questions. He just listened to you. But the whole time he was listening to you, he was cataloging what he was going to say. And then he would come out with what I call the old man stories. You all know what they are. Gus had a repertoire of stories. First on his list was standing on the runway at the Newark airport. That was always #1 with a bullet. Then his other favorite story was about Sharp James. And it was about the implosion of Stella Wright Homes. Evidently, Sharp had gotten his political contingent together, and they were all lined up, ready to do the plunger. But Gus had decided that his grandchildren were more important than any politicians could ever be. And so he had them, the cute little grandchildren, go out there, and they stood there, and Sharp was in the background. I guess he had nothing he could do because Gus was in charge, and that was a typical Gus move. Then after Gus would go through one of his, what I call old man stories, he would then drop the neutron bomb. What's the neutron bomb? You've all heard it. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, but I don't want you to give me an answer now. I want you to go home and think about this. And the next time you come back, then we'll talk about that. And that was the signal that said, you know, all that talking you were doing, you really weren't saying much of anything. It was just a lot of hot air. Needless to say, I was able to maintain my job at the Housing Authority and go on for many years, but one of the greatest privileges that I had was that Gus decided that I would be in the first class of the Gus Heningburg Fellows. And it was at the Institute on Ethnicity, Culture, and the Modern Experience. There were 4 of us. I don't know how I got in that club. Clearly, I didn't have the intellectual capital that the rest of them did, but I was just delighted to be there. And because it was the first class, we were like his children. He would make sure that he would come, and when he came, he would come in quietly, very self-effacing. He would sit down. He would cross that left leg over the right leg. He'd lean a little bit forward on that cane if he carried the cane that particular day. and he'd let us talk ourselves to death. And then after we talked ourselves to death, then it would be, I'm going to ask you a question. I don't want you to answer it right now, but I want you to think about it. And the next time we meet, I want you to give me an answer. Gee, I wish there was a next time that we were going to meet. But what I will take away from that class are some lessons that were learned, and I will always treasure these lessons. What he said to us was that Newark is like no other place in America. It is like no other place in the world because of the way it's situated, because of its assets. He said that Newarkers are a very special breed. And if you're going to work in Newark, you're going to have to understand that Newarkers love Newark. They don't see it as an impersonal city. It is a living, breathing organism. And if you're going to be successful, you've always got to take that into consideration. What Gus told us was that it was possible to have social discourse in a civil manner. There was nothing that Gus loved better than the discussion of ideas and people talking. What he also said was that despite our differences in ethnicity and culture, there are some common elements that unite us. In fact, there are more common elements that unite us than separate us. Look for those common elements first, and then you can work towards resolving your issues. You have to listen with an open mind and without any preconceived notions. Be kind, be calm. This is what made him so sought after as a mediator and as a statesman. He believed that you had to have a vision and you had to have values. You had to be authentic. You had to be your real self. There was no plastic man about Gus. He was a real man who lived and laughed and lived to the max. You must have integrity. To whom much is given, much is required, and that we are indeed our brother's keeper. He always looked out for the common man, be they construction workers, single mothers struggling at Stellarite homes, to keep a roof over their heads, the disenfranchised. You also had to stay independent. And most of all, you had to do something meaningful every day. Live your life to the fullest. I want to thank the Heningburg family for sharing Gus with us all those many years, because indeed, for him to be with us was that he wasn't with you as much as you probably would have liked it. I'm grateful for that time that I had with Gus, or as I like to call him, Gussie, Gustafer. Thank you.